Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and guide along the way. And today we're going to talk about geometry and the nature of shows. And some of you might remember that we have spoken about this quite a while ago, and we're going to revisit some ideas in some of those ideas, and in a sort of expanded and more straightforward way, I hope. And this will also then tie us back to what we spoke about 2 episodes ago about the inner ear of showmanship, as in the actual feature that we are going to explore, which will link showmanship to play in the next coming episodes. And last episode we had a sort of detour. We have a couple of, and today's kind of like a detour as well, on the way to head towards the main topic of this season, which is play and showmanship. And we spoke about the way to view the world through the lens of showmanship. And we spoke a bit about the actual way of how is it to see. How do we see when we look through this lens, and what is the lens? And how we see, that is metaphorical. It's taking 2 things that are not the same, and you place them on top and you see the similarity and the dissimilarities. The greatest creative things, I often say that when I'm creating together with someone, that it's like you take 2 ideas and you put them on top of each other. And when you take your ideas for 2 acts and do them at the same time, some of the ideas will instantly and easily connect to each other, whilst other things will seem more peripheral and more weird, and like they don't fit at all. But when you make those fit, that is when the audience will really start to appreciate the act that you do. When you're connecting a concept, and it's not just the low-hanging fruits, like the first level cursory glance at it, but they see that you've worked with it, and then you make these connections that go beyond what they could imagine. That is always a good place to be. So that's just another practical kind of way that this metaphorical thinking could be directly used in your work. Take what you thought was 2 ideas and do them at the same time, and see what comes in the space between the 2 ideas as you look deeper and further, and you zoom in and you zoom out, as we will talk about today, in to try to see how the ideas fit. So that's probably enough said about what comes today and what we talked about last time. If you are wondering what we talked about last time, the season that we are in now, Season 4, is one long cohesive thing. At the end of each episode, as you might see the previous episodes, it says showmanship and play 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this one. And this is the best way to listen to it, because the argument will be built from episode 1, episode 2, and I will use the terminology developed in episode 3 and episode 4 of these, even if the episode is called 96, 97, 98, etc. So it could benefit from going back and listening from the introduction of the showmanship and play. But each episode is also kind of freestanding. If you are happy to just take my word for certain things, and you imaginatively can live yourself into concepts that you don't fully understand, I think it will make sense as standalone episodes as well. So let's dive into the world of ideas. So today's episode, we're going to talk about geometry and the nature of shows, and the added dimension that emerges between a showman and an audience. So I'm thinking again that this is like, before we move on to shows and play, I'd like to just explore one more illustration of this space between the showman and the audience, which we a couple of episodes ago defined as the thing which will connect the origins of showmanship with what showmanship is today. So I'd like to drill this point of something new arising in the meeting between the 2, the showman and the audience, which is not wholly of the showman and not wholly of the audience, but is a merging of the 2 into something new. And the faithful followers of the Way of the Showman will remember that I have talked about geometry, triangles, and showmanship in detail in the Way of the Showman episodes, which are the episodes from 22 to 64, I think. And it's what's called Season 2, if you have one of the podcast downloaders, which gives you the season that it's in. So that was in episode 36 in season 2, and I called that episode The Geometry of Showmanship. And there I explored what the geometry of a triangle looked like through the lens of showmanship. And this time I'd like to come at the triangles from a different angle, pun intended. So before we delve into geometry, a topic which to most people could not have less to do with performance, I want to say a few words about how I arrive at a place where showmanship and geometry seen together starts making a whole lot of sense. So this episode will be another, example of this way of looking at the world, the viewing of the world through the lens of showmanship. So let's return to the picture of showmanship as a triangle made up of 3 elements. So, or even not as a triangle, but just as showmanship, as we have talked about it a couple of episodes ago. For there to be the process of showmanship to come into being, there needs to be a showman and there needs to be an audience. And when these two meet, then the phenomena that we call a show can come into existence as a third element that is not wholly showman, not wholly audience, but that emerges between them. And at a first glance, there's little to nothing in common between the triangle and, say, me swallowing a sword in a performance. So this is a strong example of needing to be able to hold one thing in our mind as a kind of living concept whilst mapping it onto something entirely different. Seeing the similar in the dissimilar, as Aristotle talked about in the last episode. Because at the first glance, it's their difference, as in me standing on a stage swallowing a sword and a triangle. When you first look at those two things, the most glaring thing is that they're just completely different. That's the most salient feature of that relationship, I think, unless you think deeper about it. For the metaphorical connection to emerge, we need to go to a level of abstraction, where it's sort of a level of abstraction that belongs more to the realm of symbolic imagination. Because to connect the two, we must spot the coincidence of 3, the number 3 of the 3 elements in both. That is... and when you just see me as a sword swallower on the stage and an audience that's there, then you don't see any similarity with a triangle. But because we have gone through this a lot now, that we can identify me as a showman and the audience, and then the show is the thing that comes into being as I swallow the sword and as I say all the mysterious things that I say when I swallow swords. So we have identified that as 3, and a triangle, of course, has the 3 points. So that connects up into a triangle. That is what a triangle is. A triangle is a particular way of connecting up 3 points. So, as we have talked about a lot, showmanship is also a coming together of 3 elements. And seen like this, when there's the 3 in the showman and 3 in showmanship and 3 in triangle, then the jump to for the coming together of these is not so great. The jump to see a triangle's 3 points as the 3 elements of showmanship is not a big leap. The gap which the metaphor needs to carry us across, as we might say, is not very wide. So as we place the showman, an audience, and show as points on a triangle, we then get a complex level of relational meaning for this triumvirate of showmanship elements. And I certainly had that the first time when I did it. And I put it on paper and you actually see it there. And then different things that I would not have thought about unless I put these things on top of each other showed itself. So let's now try to picture the metaphorical process. And so let's stick with this idea of me standing on stage swallowing a sword as the picture of showmanship. And to make that act, the sword swallowing act, relate to a triangle, like how do we get to that? And then we do that by looking at it with a metaphorical slant, as we've already talked about. And this slant is a kind of zooming out or zooming in. And by zooming out, in this particular case, it's like you're zooming out to a certain scale, like you're zooming out on Google Maps. And as you do so, the individual features of the person on stage, in this case me, sort of vanishes. You can't quite see that it is me. So it stops being me in that sense when you zoom out, and it becomes a generic sword swallower. It becomes less specific and more allegorical, and zoom a little bit further out, and the sword and the swallowing becomes impossible to make out. And from this view, all we can make out now is the archetypal structure of the many that is around the one, an audience watching a showman. And at this scale, we can still see vague movements from the showman and see the responsive movement in the audience. But all we can see for sure is the living sort of give and take, call and response in movement and motion, that there is a connection between them. But because we can still make out that they are human beings, and because we too are human beings, we can safely assume that there is a rich inner experience that's similar to our own going on in this give and take of the actions. And so there's action, there's behavior, there's meaning in the actions and the behavior. And in this relational way that we know, there is a deep emotional component to the actions and reactions, which is invisible and internal, all the emotions that's going on with it. But this aspect of it is no less real than the actions and behaviors. But we can't quite see these emotional relations. But we know we know that by spoiler alert, that this is the actual phenomenon of the show, which you can't see, but you can see the audience and the performer. Even though you've scaled and zoomed out to a scale where you can't see that, it's actually me swallowing a sword. So perhaps this image of scale and zooming in, zooming out can shed some light on the mental gymnastics going on in my mind when I'm playing with this manner of experience. And I'm again here riffing on the actual process of placing two different things alongside each other and seeking their relation. And the scaling out is one way to sort of describe the mental squinting or whatever, and it's a reminder also of that there is an inner dimension even when we abstract away and we can't quite see it. So hopefully this way of zooming in and out sort of expresses the push and pull and the give and take of this process. As you zoom out, you lose certain things, but other things becomes visible. It's like the scales of a map. When we're mapping the territory, the different scales of it will afford us different views of the territory. So this process is just another descriptive example of the kind of first pass on letting two things speak to each other, much like the cell biology example that we talked about last episode. So now let's go a little further. So in this open-minded, zoomed-out, living concept kind of way, showman and audience are the most concrete elements, as we just mentioned. When we zoom out, the showman and the audience are actual physical beings. The show, on the other hand, is a little more nebulous. We can see and infer the show by the way the showman and the audience respond to each other and maintain their relational structure, i.e. that they're facing each other over time. So like as you zoom out from the satellite view of me swallowing the sword, just the fact that you're looking at it and you have a bunch of people gathered around one person and that they remain there, and that there is some movement back and forth there that allows us, affords us the ability to infer that there is something going on here which is important for them, but that it has some sort of internal connection rather than an external connection, even for no other reason than the fact that we've just zoomed out enough so we can't see it. So, but it is clear here that there is a difference between the phenomena of a show and the phenomena of a showman and an audience, that there's a more concrete dimension to the showman and the audience. So if we were to start drawing the abstract geometrical representation of showmanship on paper, it makes a whole lot of sense to me to start with drawing the first point and name it Showman. I draw one dot on a piece of paper and call it Showman. We can do this. I think you could say that the showman is the instigator, the first spark, and therefore the first spot. The audience doesn't randomly gather and hope that there will be a showman. It's usually the showman that, if we think of it in the archetypal idea of the market square, where the showman goes out onto the market square, then he stands there and goes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just about to do a show, and then people gather and they become an audience, if we look at it sort of archetypally. So if he is the first spark, then we can draw him as the first spot. And then for him to be a showman, we need to relatively quickly follow on by drawing another point, which is the audience. Those are the two first points. The showman is point one, and the audience, in as much as many individuals can be given a fleeting concreteness as a unity, they are also then illustrated by one point. And now there are 2 points on the paper. And if we draw a line now from one point to the other, then I think we have a pretty good illustration of the connection between a showman and an audience. The line is a relation. They're not just 2 points in proximity, they are connected. And it is this connection which, in a sense, makes the 2 points what they are. The relation pictured by the line makes the points what they are. In a sense, then, the line connecting the two is more important than the points. Since if the points aren't related or connected with the line, then what we sort of have drawn is the showman is just someone with a certain set of skills. And a group of people is just that, a random set of strangers with no connection to each other and no relation to the showman. So then there is no chance that we're going to get a show. So when we draw this line, we sort of forge and concretize the relationship. And the 2 points, showman and audience, becomes realized potential or realized potentiality, because a person with the set of skills that I have of swallowing a sword and a market square where there are people doing other things has always got the potential of becoming a show. And in me stepping out there, then a random set of strangers can become an audience, and a person with a set of skills, such as myself, can become a showman. But it is only when that line is drawn between those two that I fully come into, I go from being potentially a showman to actually being a showman as the audience forms. So the process of showmanship is not a one-way street. It's not just the showman shoving his material at the crowd. The process is reciprocal. So the showman, me in this case, I pay attention to the crowd as individuals and as a group. And I am reading the group dynamic and learning whom it is that I am facing. How are they reacting? I'm presenting my material and constantly taking stock of how it is received and how it affects my audience. So as you see, if this line between the 2 points is a picture of that relation, we can make a whole lot can be made and seen from just drawing this one simple line between 2 points. So we see here that this metaphor is, I've developed it further and thought of it a little bit more than the cell biology of last time. So hopefully this will give a more sense of the depth that it can have. So anyway, we've now moved from the concrete image of me swallowing sword in a show to the image of a showman and an audience, and then we finally arrive at the image of 2 points joined together into a line. It's kind of pretty abstract, but I still believe that if we look at it as a living concept through this metaphorical lens, then it can safely carry us over this leap of scale where we zoom in and out into abstraction. So that was very complexly expressed. It's just saying that when we zoom out here, then you can think that this is all quite abstract, but I still think that in this abstraction we find some very concrete and useful ways of looking at it, and that you sort of go, oh, okay, actually this is more deeply connected than what we thought. So if these leaps in scale and abstraction haven't put you off by now, then we've sort of securely arrived at the world of elementary geometry. By drawing so much meaning out of just trying to draw the 2 points and how the line can connect it together, I think we have the resonance that I get from this is that, okay, this is worthwhile continuing to look at, because it seems to be a very good fit, which then would say that, you should spend a little bit more time looking at this. Maybe there's more to be found. But then to be able to move on with the metaphor, we'll have to take a little quick refresher of some general facts about points and lines and degrees of circles and how they relate to triangles, before we'll sort of place the triangle and showmanship next to each other and see what we learn. But of course, when you already have this in mind now, as I'm going through the ideas of lines and whatnot, then you will already be able to see it, I hope. So here we go. And you might remember from school that a circle has 360 degrees. It's divided into 360 degrees like a compass or a circle. So, and if you're a skateboarder or a snowboarder, you'll know about the 360 or whatever from the sort of jumping, twisting, and pirouetting tricks. If you do an ollie on a skateboard, you do a 360 ollie on a skateboard, you jump up into the air and do a full pirouette, landing and continuing the roll with the same foot forward. If you do a half pirouette, jumping on the skateboard and turning a halfway around, you'll continue rolling forward, but what was the back leg is now the front leg. So you've just done a 180. And also the phrase to do a 180 might mean to completely reverse one's opinion on the topic. Like, I don't like banana ice cream, and all of a sudden I do a 180 and I love banana ice cream. This is to do the exact opposite of what you said or intended of doing, or changing your meaning. So this should give us a meaning of what 180 is. And further, if you cut a circle, or as one of the types of circles that we frequently cut, pizzas, if we cut the pizza in half, then each half is now 180 degrees, or exactly half of the 360 degree of a full pizza. So the line that emerges where you slice the pizza, and I mean just the line, that also is 180 degrees. And if you imagine sort of slicing a super thin slice off the straight edge of the pizza, just flat enough of the flat end of the half circle to form a thin line, then this line of the pizza is also 180 degrees. So whenever you join 2 points, like A and B, by a line, this line will always be 180 degrees. And maybe that sounds a little bit odd or whatever, but that line, they actually, sometimes a line can be called a straight angle. And a line is then a 180 degree straight angle. And we don't encounter this concept of straight angles very much, but we know a little bit about angles. Like we see 90-degree angles in rooms whenever the floor meets the wall. Almost every room that exists, most rooms, some of the most interesting ones, don't have this kind of 90-degree geometry, but be that as it may, where the floor meets the wall is usually 90 degrees. And any line completely perpendicular to another one forms a 90-degree angle. It's like the corners of a book when it's lying on the table. But if you continue to widen the angle, then it'll go from 90 to 95 to 80. And if you widen it angle, so it's the angle widens out, then it's completely flat into a line or a straight angle, then that angle will be double the angle. It's two 90-degree angles, so 180 degrees. So a line is 180 degrees. So, turning right at the corner of a city block is usually a right angle, and then if you don't turn but continue straight on, you're driving along a straight angle. So you're driving along the 180 degrees. I don't know if this is so simple that it sounds complicated, or it is just a line is sometimes, or one way to, a line is 180 degrees. That's what I'm going, that's all there is. So what is a line though, apart from being 180 degrees? And in one way, a line is what connects 2 points, A and B. And in another way, we could also imagine that a line is kind of made up of infinitely many points that each sort of touching each other. As long as each point is situated directly and exactly alongside the shortest route between A and B, they will be part of the line. So any points that's made directly in between A and B will be a line. A line between A and B can be infinitely divided up into as many points as you want, but it can also then be seen as a whole, as a line that connects A and B. So and this is a little bit more poetic, if we poetically look at these things, you could say that the line A and line B, particularly if we keep in mind showman and audience, and so you could say that each point is kind of potentially sprouting from point A to and from point B. They're sort of reaching towards each other, like they're sprouting out from A and sprouting out from B and going in a direct line, and they sort of touch each other like roots seeking water. And then they meet in the middle, but then they sort of continue intertwined past each other, forming a bridge of connection going both ways, truly joining A and B points, and in the process making them no longer separate points, but making the whole thing one line. Now, what happens if we introduce one other point, not on the line? Or if we kind of imagine that one of the myriad points making up the line between A and B lifts slightly off the line, a little bit upwards, even just a little centimeter, then what we have is no longer just a line. Now we have 3 points, 2 which are joined by a line, and by imagining that this third point lifted off from the line, then we have it in mind that it belongs together with the other 2 points. It came from the line and lifted out, but now for it to be included, it needs to be connected in a new way. So it makes sense to join the new point that has been lifted off when we join that with A and B. And to unify the 3 points, we must draw a line from A and a line from B, which will meet in the third point, which we will then call AB. And we call it AB since this point is not just A and is not just B, but it has lifted off the line and that was made from the union of the 2 points, and hence this new point is part A and part B, which is why we call it AB. Or if we jump ahead and just say we have the showman and the show, the showman and the audience, and as they are connecting deeper and deeper, the show becomes a third thing, not wholly showman, not wholly audience, but it becomes this. So the AB could also then be seen as the show, but this is jumping ahead. I'll talk about that in a minute. But as these 3 points are joined, any 3 points joined in together is a triangle, and as this third point is joined with lines to A and B, a whole new dimension emerges. The line has transformed. It goes from being a line into being a triangle. And a triangle is like a little fence. There's now an inside and an outside, and perhaps even more fundamentally and more important, there is now an area, a two-dimensional area. Whilst the line doesn't really have an area. It's like a fence that's just put up between two fence posts, A and B. It would just be a fence line. But to create a fenced-off area, the minimum amount of fence posts needed is 3. So with one more point lifting off the line, that gives rise to a triangle. And when that happens, we quite literally get a whole new dimension in our geometry picture. We go from a one dimension of the line to a 2 dimensions of the triangle. So now we have a whole different object on our hands, you might think. A triangle is something completely different from a line, since we have added a new point, which in one sense could be true. A line and a triangle are 2 different geometrical objects, yet staying within geometry, a triangle can still be seen as a transformed line, and one reason for this is that, as we saw before, a line is 180 degrees, but when one point from that line lifts up, and that line then, you get 3 points and it forms a triangle, we find that the triangle is still 180 degrees. The sum of internal angles inside every single triangle that you could ever draw, those angles, if you match them up, and you're drawing with a ruler and whatever, then the sum of those angles always adds up to 180 degrees. So in an imaginative sense, a triangle can still always be seen as a very strange or particular manifestation of a line. Yet this is obviously not true. So a triangle is completely different from a line because it's more than it was before. It's like the emergence of a whole new species. It's something all new, whilst also carrying within it the sum of what it came from. It's a great example of the coming together of 2 things, and how one thing transformed can be more than the sum of its parts. Perhaps. This is why I described the third point as being lifted off the line rather than adding a third new random point. Because the original A to B line is still all that it was. But in the third point, which is the manifestation of the union of the 2, we get a whole new dimension. So, armed with this enriched picture of geometry, let's now finally place it alongside our concept of the showmanship triangle. And we should now be able to conjure up 2 rather complex pictures in our minds, one of showmanship as a triumvirate of showman, audience, and show, and one geometric image of points, lines, and triangle. And as we begin to overlay these 2 images of showmanship and triangle to see what this metaphoric overlay of the 2 mind maps we've made, I believe we're getting into a genuine act of imagination, a creation of images, which happens to be the actual meaning that we find at the etymological roots of the word imagination. It's like to create images. And I think this is like connected. So the imaginative act is this metaphorical act that we've now spoken so much about. So as we go forth between the 2 images, and as we talk about this now, just try to keep them both in mind. And hopefully, as I have gone through these details of making a triangle and how a triangle is a transformed line that you've already continuously substituted. When I say A and B, that you substitute that with audience and showman and whatever, and you will already have gotten some of these pictures, but I'm going to try and spell out some of these things anyway. So just try and hold the images or living concepts of triangle and showmanship loosely. Don't focus too hard on the fact that they are indeed completely different. Don't strain to combine what doesn't overlap, but just when you're struck by their difference, keep in mind this trick of scale and zooming in and out, and perhaps you can picture what we are looking for as belonging to a level below, like before the differentiation, if you will, or zooming out like it's after or whatever. They are different, but they are also the same. And such is this way of seeing, and such is the world. The similarities are there if you let them emerge for you. So, we have two triangles and a whole new dimension. We're sort of stepping backwards here a little bit. So, we have the showman as the first point. We call him A, since it is through the gravity of the showman that the audience takes form. Through the call for attention, the showman gathers the many into a crowd, and by carefully curating their shared time and attention, the crowd of many individuals become one audience, which is our second point, B. The shared attention between the showman, A, and the audience, B, goes both ways. It's a reciprocal relationship of give and take. This relationship is the first line. As this union strengthens, the relationship deepens, and the meeting of the two, A and B, becomes a shared reality, something new, something more than what was present as they first faced each other. As their connection deepens, as the showman and the audience's connection deepens, and genuine interest in each other grows and takes hold, their desire for what's developed between them becomes strong enough to be something than the mere back and forth meeting of the line. The nature of the audience, made up of individuals, each investing and seeing something valuable, enjoyable, and enlivening in what the showman offers, is becoming a thing unto itself. Not wholly showman, not wholly audience, but a new state, so altered that it deserves its own designation. A new point emerges, springing from the relation between the two. We called it AB in geometry, and we call it show along the way of the showman. The beautiful thing now, as we map the two images, is how when the audience has given themselves over to what the showman has to offer, the experience grows into a show. Like a different kind of reality emerges. In this new dimension, the impossible can become possible, time becomes elastic. So like this new dimension is actually an experience, and it can feel like time slows down, as if you're watching, going back to that image of me swallowing the sword, so 1/2 meter of stainless steel slowly slides down my throat, and people feel like time slows down, like this is so salient, it just stands out so strongly for them that it feels like time is slowing down. Or if they're fully into the whole show, then time might completely cease to exist, so that when they look at their watch after the show, what felt like no time in reality turns out it was an hour or whatever. And the space that we're sharing where the performance happens, that can feel really vast and also intimate at the same time. And in this dimension, questions arise. Like, why does he swallow the sword? Does he really risk his life here for my entertainment? Am I doing what I want with my life? How do I want to live? And who will we be to each other? Things are no longer just what they seem in this altered space. In the space between the showman and audience, or in the this new dimension that emerges between them, stories told take on deeper meaning. The show effortlessly transports us to where profound levels of depth emerge, sometimes from the seemingly mundane. So for a stolen time, we pierce the veil of the ordinary and enter into a more human level, ancient and primitive, yet so very much about the present moment, the here and the now. It's a bubble that can be burst so easily. The police comes and shuts down the show, or the power goes out, or whatever. But in this space, in this kind of relation that is now happening between the showman and the audience, the storyteller and the tribe, this is where myths and heroes and common folk and monsters and magic and the sacred, the sense of the sacred belongs in this dimension. This dimension of a show can beautifully be placed up against the geometry of triangles, where a line, A and B, showman and audience, births a new point off the line, and we are given a new dimension, where the line is transformed into triangle, where we jump from one-dimensional to two-dimensional, where the no extension of the line changes to the extension area of the triangle, where the way to measure changes from centimeters to centimeters squared. The inner space inside the triangle has extension, and this new dimension maps so sweetly to the imaginal dimension of the shows. The coming together of the two metaphorical maps seems to both to be pointing perhaps at this imaginal space which Henri Corbin talked about. A metaphor, this that I've just talked about now, a metaphor is not a proof. It is but mental pictures side by side. But that said, if we see this as an example of Emily Dickinson's truth told with the slant, which allows us to see the truth clearer, since to be able to grasp the truth, it must, as she says, dazzle gradually. It must dazzle us gradually, or every man be blind. We can't see it if it doesn't dazzle us gradually, and hopefully I've managed to lead you along in this so that I have been able to dazzle you gradually so that you can see this truth that I'm trying to point to. And what I've talked about, it might not be a proof following the rules of formal logic, and it might not follow the rules of reason even, but to me, these pictures side by side, together and apart, becomes gunpowder that drives deep points of connection tinged with mystery. It drives it home and embeds them in my mind. So I have, and I did that in the episode long ago, I called this area that emerges when the third point goes off the line and a new page, I call that the area of interest. This sort of betweenness, when that becomes a thing in itself, and A and B becomes AB, showman and audience join in attention and a show emerges. So I call this new area in the triangle, which is not present in the line, I call that aspect of showmanship the area of interest. And this is, in the truest sense, where shows take place. The area of interest is where showman and audience come together around all aspects of reality in as much as it captures and holds human attention. I unpack that line a little bit. Like, in this area of interest, what captures and holds human interest in that can be done in a show or in a showing, that is all the things that human beings do when we gather. It's what in extended form we find in movies. It's what we do when we tell each other stories. It's the gossip that we do. It's all those things that can capture and hold human interest. That's what is the contents of the area of interest. And what is interest? The etymological root of the word offers us yet another recursive glimpse of truth. As it is made up, interest is made from the Latin inter, meaning between, and esse, inter est esse, meaning being. So the between being. So inter est means between being. the state of being that emerges between human beings, say a showman and a glorious group of individuals in the relationship that we call an audience. So interest, the state of being in between, And perhaps these rantings and conjectures that I have here amounts to little in the way of logical, rational proof, but attempting to find the heart of a living concept such as showmanship, I believe we must seek truths that speak to the heart first, to then be assimilated into the head in which way individuals can make things true to themselves. But yeah, I don't even know, as I'm telling you that, I don't even know if geometry is a easy way into the hearts of people. I guess when it comes down to it, it's not geometry that is highest on the list for people who when you think about the matters of the heart. Not so often that poetry or songs are about geometry, and when it is, it's probably like we mentioned in the end of the last episode, the Sam Cooke, who doesn't know much about geometry, but now you do, and I believe you are richer for it. So as a final comment, I'd like to add that I believe it is this area of interest, the imaginal realm, which is the equivalent of the bony inner ear which connects the dog-like carnivore Bacchus mammal with the majestic humpback whale, as we've talked about now. It's been a running thread through all of this. This area of interest dimension that emerges between human beings is the aspect of showmanship, which I will use as an Ariadne thread. Ariadne, who used a thread to guide her man through the labyrinth with the Minotaur to save him. I will use it as this thread to guide me as I seek the origins of showmanship, as we will move on to play and whatever. So where or when did this imaginal dimension that we've talked so much about emerge? This dimension where, and this is kind of leading examples here, like in this dimension is because not just performance and juggling and rhetoric of a preacher or a shaman, which could happen in this space, but it's also where small sticks shoved into pine cones can become animals. And it's in this dimension where a story of a man with a warhammer fighting a huge sea serpent can become gods. So I have been hinting or mentioning Emily Dickinson and the Truth Told slant a few times, so I thought I'd like to finish off today here now to let the glorious poet Emily Dickinson say in 40 words what I haven't fully managed to say in more than 5,000 words over the last 2 episodes. So take it away, Emily Dickinson, read by yours truly. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise, as lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise. Too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. I have nothing to add. All right, and there we get to the end of this episode, and I did say I didn't have much more to say, but I have this to say, and that is I need you to help me get the word of what's going on on this podcast out. So please, if you haven't done it before, take the time out of your busy schedule and, when I post the link to an upcoming episode, post it on your story. Simple click, or even tell someone you know that this podcast exists. If you do that, I'd be very grateful. Until next time, take care of yourself, those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.